unopinionated people. And so what that means is the score actually goes from positive 100 to negative 100, which is an odd thing. So very pragmatic example, if everybody loved the experience, you have 100% of people loved it, minus 0, that's a positive 100. If everybody hated the experience, that's 0 minus 100, so you get a negative 100 scale. One thing to derive from that is a positive score means there's more people that enjoyed the process than not. So positive 1 is on the good side of things to begin with, but ideally you get a little bit higher than that and do as best as you can. It's virtually impossible to get up 100. There's always somebody that's upset about something for some reason, might be moderately upset. So naturally, you have to read through things and understand the context of the answers given, look at the details. But zooming out from NPS before we get into some of the data around it, I would say that in Ashby, you can customize your candidate experience surveys. You should think about what matters to you and your team. NPS is a great place to start for benchmarking and thinking about things overall as one number, but it's not the end of the story. So just some references. If we look at our customer base, we actually have a really great average NPS, which is 37. Like people that use Ashby, go through the Ashby experience, tend to be pretty happy. And if you looked at NPS for other products, not just ATSs, it's like hard to even get into the upper tens of score. But today we have two companies that are like exceptional on that score, both HackerOne and Notion with the 60-ish scores. They're going to tell us a little bit about how they achieved that. But before we dive into their sort of stories and perspective, I'll share one chart here, which is, again, it's one number. And whenever you're dealing with one number, you run a little bit of a risk of like, well, how do you segment that, break it down? What's going on underneath the hood? Is there context you need to pay attention to? So this is an example of breaking NPS down by the furthest stage reached. And so over at the right, if you sample somebody's NPS when they get hired, you probably bet they're going to be pretty happy. You know, they had a good experience, they liked the team, they decided to work with you. So you could call it a bias towards positive. If you reject somebody immediately, they do one screen or maybe not even get a screen. I've seen that happen. You just reject after application and send an NPS score or survey. Not exactly recommended, but you might be a little bit lower. And that's what we actually see a trend as people go through more of the process. It tends to be a little bit higher. But this is just one example of showing that if you segment things, you might be able to think about what you can improve, where you can improve it, why you need to improve it. It could be by department, could be by recruiter, could be by manager, could be by any number of features. So if you want to get tactical, you can. You can start from the single number and know if you're in a ballpark good place, but then you can pick things apart. You might even have a great score, but some areas that need improvement. But with that, pass it back to you, Kelsey.
Thanks for sharing that. So, Kate, your candidate NPS is over 59. What are your non-negotiables in the candidate journey that you believe drive this high score?
Yeah, I think for us, we just try to remember that candidates are humans and they're people. I think it's easy in recruiting to think everyone's just part of a dashboard, part of a funnel, and you want to move people through. But it's those relationships that differentiate whether people join or not. And so through the process, how do we actually create those like genuine relationships, whether that's through like getting each other on text, learning about what's important to them, and then giving them kind of gifts or mementos through the process that help them remember that we are really getting to know them. And I love seeing those, whether it's like we have candidates in the process who are going through like the gift of a baby in the process and it's sending them kind of a gift for that, or knowing their favorite restaurant or something that's happening within their family. I've seen people going through surgery and getting gifts for that. Like we really want to get to know people. And ultimately we think that that drives a lot of decision making, is that they feel connected to how we work at Notion. And for us, like we hire on 2 dimensions, which is best in craft and aligned with our values. And for us, the recruiting craft there is really, really important. We want to make sure that we're driving that interaction and that experience all the way through. So that for us, I think, has driven a lot of why our engagement is high and will continue to be so. We want to be really kind and direct with people through the process and just have that genuine relationship.
The recruiting as a craft concept you had shared before, and I think it probably resonates with a lot of folks in this room. I'm curious, when you're onboarding new people, new recruiters specifically, how are you acclimating them to that mindset?
Yeah, so we have a document internally called How Notion Hires, and it goes down to our hiring philosophy. We spend a lot of time with our founders sharing more about how Notion hires and why hiring at Notion is one of the most important things that you can do at the company. And I think recruiters take a lot of pride in that. We actually have one coming up next week We call it Firesides with Ivan. And he shares more about why recruiting is like the most leveraged activity for anyone at the company. And I think that's like really special and core to recruiters. I think they feel pride, they feel excited to join. And we like to share that when we hire recruiters because it's very special to work somewhere where they really care about recruiting and think it's, again, one of the biggest levers that we can have at a company. That's amazing.
Wonderful. Now, Kayla, actually, as a clarification, the score said 63. As of late, your average NPS is 64. So we want to rob you of that 1 point. I'm curious, we just talked that you're doing triple hiring volume of average, and you have an NPS that high. I think people are really curious how you're achieving that.
Yeah, so I'm embarrassed to say 3 years ago, on Glassdoor, on the interviews, we had 73% negative interview score. And that didn't align with our values. Respect all people was one of our values. So that was something that we really identified that we needed to drive change in. So we decided we wanted to implement SLAs and KPIs to drive the right behaviours around candidate experience. We joined the Circle Back initiative, which is an initiative where you are always finishing that loop with the candidate, so always getting back to candidates and offering them phone calls with feedback. So that was a priority for us. The SLAs that we implemented were 10 days for application review and again, feedback on the telephone, offering that. Not everybody wants that, right? Some people want it in an email, but the offer of it at least. And we moved away from those KPIs now because it's really kind of been fundamentally set within the team. But from 2022, our NPS was 50, and obviously it's at 64 today. And now on Glassdoor, we have 78% positive reviews. So I really believe it set the foundations, aligning with our values, what we believe in, to really stay in touch with those candidates. Also, the structured interviewing really helped because we are able to prep a candidate for every single stage, give them the talking points, give them some suggested questions, and it's really helped with the alignment of the process.
Being able to offer live feedback to everybody whom you interview is incredible as part of that Circle Back campaign. When you were instituting that, did you receive pushback internally around folks being too busy or any concerns around how people might take that feedback?
It was during a quieter period, so we implemented that towards the end of 2022, which was obviously around the tech layoff time. So we were definitely quieter, and as I said, we take those opportunities to be able to implement those opportunities that we see. Now it's a little bit harder with the amount of hires that we're doing, but like I said, the fundamentals are still there.
That's wonderful. And how would you define a human candidate experience in today's hiring environment?
Yeah, I want candidates to see us as their champion. Like, recruiters get a lot of stick. You see it on LinkedIn all the time, bad experiences. We want them to see us as we add value to their process, and we've really helped them through that.
Wonderful. I'm going to pivot us, this is Swift, to our final topic of the day. Kevin, can we chat a little bit about the employer's market?
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to take over here. Let's see. So on this topic, employers market, basically could boil it down to offer acceptance rate in one view. Like, is it high or is it low? If candidates have a lot of options, even if they loved your experience, what you have to offer them, they've got choices and they might reject at a higher rate your offers. So if we look at this chart, the bar chart shows the relative offer volume over time. I'm going to try and point over it. And Q2 2022 is that peak, that's sort of the exuberance of hiring, funding, growth, and then the sort of precipitous fall into offer volume there means people are pulling back offers, maybe reneging them. People are less likely to open a bunch of headcount when funding is not on the horizon. And so we see right before that, at the top of that peak, the offer acceptance rate is actually the lowest. That's what you see there. And so there's a lot of options, a lot of offers going around. And then you see as the offers disappear, the offer acceptance rate starts to creep up. And that's when it starts to become an employer's market. We also know from our prior charts that inbound goes through the roof. There's a lot of unfortunate rifts, layoffs, a lot of talent on the market looking for roles, and then the focus on inbound hiring picks up. We could break this apart a little bit more, again, go into our sort of classification of business roles versus technical roles. And I don't know how quite to interpret this, but it stands out as the technical roles really had a lot of the variation. This might be driven by technical engineering type hiring, but it's like a 10-point spread between engineering offer acceptance rates being very low when there's a lot of demand and growth happening to coming up 10 points to a new baseline and to where we are basically today. So much like NPS, in the sense you can start with one number, like an offer acceptance rate, and you can start to segment it out and look for trends and look for differences. I generally recommend that as a data person, to start looking at the underlying features, which might reveal more interesting information. So on that theme, the last chart we have here is just the roll-up offer acceptance rate split another way, which is by industry. So you might hear like a best offer acceptance rate being bandied about and shared, but even if you just look at different industries, you can see about a 10-point spread. You can find yourself, maybe you're in healthcare, maybe you're in finance. Your starting point, just to get triangulated, where do we stand on our general offer acceptance rate? Maybe you can use something like this, but I would always recommend starting to dig into the details and segment. Of course, job seniority, role would be another factor which might influence the offer acceptance rate and such. But with that, Kelsey, I'll pass it back to you.
So we just kind of saw differences among industries, differences among role types. Kayla, you had shared that for customer success and marketing, it was very much an employer's market at HackerOne, but maybe for engineering, it seems to be candidate-led. How does that show up? What does that look like?
Yeah, so for our non-technical roles, our time to fill is around 40 days. But with engineering, it's creeping up every day at the moment. So we're sitting at 111 days for engineering. I think a big part of this is HackerOne, like every company, is looking to adopt AI. So when we're hiring engineers, we want them to have data or AI experience. So we're having to be much more strategic for the engineering roles and some of the technical roles, and really have to focus and prioritize that time on sourcing now.
And how are you thinking about prioritizing sourcing? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so we've mapped the market, so we hire in hubs. We've really mapped the markets to understand what the competitors look like in those markets, so what their salaries are, which sort of companies tend to do counter-offers when it gets towards the end of the process with the candidate. We're aligning with the candidates really early on and trying to understand whether they want to essentially work for a scale-up or whether they want big corporate, and just understand what motivates them and if we have a chance of actually closing them at the end of the process. And we're obviously using data to influence as well, but further from that, with regards to the sourcing, we're having sourcing parties on the team, so we identify critical or hard-to-fill roles, stick some music on, have an hour call, and say we want 75 candidates in this project by the end of the call. And then we'll also do async offline sourcing projects. So again, we'll identify critical roles. All the engineers will have all the recruiters, will have a target to add candidates into that project. And we're making hires of it. One just went through today as well. So I think it's really great to get some teamwork and some different perspectives.
That's wonderful. I'm curious, what is the distinction between sort of the live sourcing party and the async? What are you seeing as distinctions among them?
Yeah, so I've worked at companies before where we've done sourcing parties and people just wouldn't turn up and they weren't really engaged, but our recruiters really enjoy it. And I think they get a variety of, first of all, working together, because we're across so many different time zones. It's actually that time to collaborate and do it together. And the async ones are just like, hey, if you have a couple of hours here, I'd like you to do this.
That makes sense. I'm going to pivot us a little bit. Kate, you had shared previously when we were chatting that interview scores are not always predictive of performance. I think maybe that resonates with some folks here. What does quality of hire look like for you now, and how are you thinking about redefining it?
Yeah, so we don't have like fancy surveys we send hiring managers. We're looking at it, but maybe not calling it a survey, like something more, I don't know, Notion-y, we'll figure that out. But what we do is every 6 months or so, we are looking at we assign kind of scores against interviews, so looking at kind of what their rating was in the interview. And then we look at their performance, and we have a performance rating system. We kind of cross those, and then we look at how are people actually performing based on what we thought they were going to perform like in the interview. And I think that's really helping us reshape how we target and go after for our sourcing efforts. Folks will be successful at Notion. I'm guessing many of you are in companies that are growing and changing. I feel like Notion continues to evolve every few months. We have new ways we think about things, new things we're shipping. And so that will shift talent profile. And so we need to stay on the cutting edge of who is able to be successful at Notion, what skills and things they bring to the table, and then how do we adapt that from the recruiting side. And because we do view sourcing as an art for us, our recruiters spend a lot of time taking that and actually going after people who we think will be successful. So it's not just only like calibrating those scores internally, but it's also kind of meeting with hiring managers and understanding what skills they're looking for and how do we pivot that in recruiting. I think to the controversial part, there are like situations sometimes where you find people aren't calibrated on what they're looking for. And those debriefs are really that time when recruiting gets to ask those pointed questions. Sometimes a no, if you actually read the scorecard, it's actually a yes, or the inverse, right? Like you have to spend some time going through the scorecard and asking detailed questions. You can't just take it for face value. And often those candidates who might have kind of controversial feedback, it's actually not that they wouldn't be successful, but maybe they have an area that they might need extra support in, and that manager spikes in the area, so it's actually a great person to hire. So I love that debriefs for us are actually like a must-do in a time when recruiters get to flex their skills as like thoughtful business partners. And so rarely do I ever see a canceled debrief. We use it as a time to calibrate, even if there are all no scorecards. Sometimes they get canceled, but most of the time they don't. And I think it's just a really special time for us as a team.
I agree. The debriefs, I think maybe many of us have experienced this. Like you can see a wall of threes and green, and you're feeling good going into the debrief, and things shift. They're very important.
Yeah.
This is very tactical, but I'm curious, when you're doing this quality of hire analysis, anything surprised you? Like any tidbits you've gleaned around profiles that are different than you expected?
Yeah, I'd say like on the whole, people from big companies do well at Notion. That was like a surprising one for me, like in terms of like where we pull people from, which was I think surprising. I think we thought, okay, like early startup DNA. That's just kind of a generalist trend that we saw. We also looked at like what types of kind of work that people were doing before. A lot of people sometimes had like large support teams that were working with them to get their work done, and we're always like very focused on staying scrappy. And so even at the leadership level, we all have the IC mentality running through our veins. So that'd be another one. We often find that like strong kind of IC energy is really like part of how Notion operates. And we expect managers to do a fair amount of IC work themselves. And I think it's something they lean into. That was another interesting one.
That makes sense. Maybe a final question for us. You both are working with different models, certainly different growth stages. What is something through connecting today and we chatted a few weeks ago that you have learned from each other's approach?
So I think you're where we would like to be, right? Like we're a scale up that is scaling rapidly. So this quarter, we've grown the team from 4 to soon to be 10. So I think that from some of the conversations that we've had, where you're really focusing on that strategic kind of area for the recruiters, that's like where we want to be, and where I'd love to see us kind of move into.
Yeah, and I think for us, like we have leaned on more of the art versus science for recruiting. Like we don't use time to hire as like a core metric that we look at. I think for us, it's like time and stage. But I think just seeing of like how data-driven you all are, I think there's a happy medium. Having the analytics platform has been big for that. But just how do we kind of build metrics into like our rigorous hiring philosophy, and how can we do kind of both at the same time? I think it's really good food for thought as we flex into this like next phase of growth.
Thanks for sharing that. Maybe just a final thought from me, maybe caveat this could have been early on in this panel, but what we shared today are reference points, right? So I think let's not walk away and say, okay, my target NPS is this. Let's use it as a framing to think about how we operate, where we want to improve, what applies to our organization. So less about beating and achieving and more about learning. And then the other piece of this is we had 30 minutes today. I think I could have used another hour with you all. These are parts of the conversation, but these are themes that we can continue through the rest of the day. So find folks, connect with them, learn from them. Hopefully this is a jumping off point for additional conversations. And with that, thank you to you all, and have a great rest of Ashby One.